Good evening. I'm Alex Truth.
And I'm Maya Clarity. Welcome to Truth Report.
Tonight, we're connecting dots that power doesn't want connected. 5 stories that seem unrelated: air pollution rules in America, war crimes in Ukraine, a Nobel Prize winner's climate breakthrough, a journalist's death in Brazil, and stretchable screens. But by the end of this broadcast, you'll see the pattern.
Because this isn't just about climate change. It's about who gets to decide which science matters, who gets poisoned for profit, and who gets erased when they tell the truth.
Let's start with the air you're breathing right now. According to ProPublica's investigation published this week, Trump's Environmental Protection Agency is preparing to limit its own ability to update air pollution regulations when new scientific evidence emerges. Think about that. The agency tasked with protecting your health is arguing it shouldn't be allowed to act on new science showing chemicals are killing people.
The immediate target is ethylene oxide, a chemical used in sterilization and plastics manufacturing. In 2016, EPA scientists discovered ethylene oxide was 30 times more carcinogenic than previously understood. 30 times. That's not a rounding error. That's a fundamental reassessment of public health risk.
Under Biden-era rules finalized in 2024, new regulations would have reduced the number of people exposed to cancer-causing levels of ethylene oxide from 90,000 residents living near chemical facilities down to 3,000. That's 87,000 people who would no longer be breathing carcinogens at dangerous levels every single day.
But here's where it gets sinister. The chemical industry is arguing that the Clean Air Act prohibits the EPA from conducting multiple residual risk reviews based on new evidence. They're claiming the agency gets one shot at regulation, and after that, even if science proves a chemical is far deadlier than anyone thought, the EPA's hands are tied.
And Trump's EPA is buying this argument. They've already granted exemptions to dozens of facilities while they reconsider whether they have legal authority to protect public health. Let that sink in. Right now, tonight, chemical plants that should be reducing emissions are pumping ethylene oxide into communities because the EPA decided corporate lawyers make a compelling case.
We need to talk about Louisiana's Cancer Alley, because this isn't theoretical. Researchers detected ethylene oxide concentrations far higher than the EPA's models predicted. The science showed people were being poisoned. But under the interpretation Trump's EPA is advancing, the agency would be legally prohibited from responding to that evidence.
This is regulatory capture in its purest form. The industry being regulated is literally writing the rules about which science regulators can use. It's like letting tobacco companies decide whether the Surgeon General can warn about lung cancer.
Environmental legal experts say this policy would fundamentally prevent the EPA from adapting to new research. When asked about the implications, one advocate told ProPublica it pretty much ensures the agency will systematically underestimate health risks. Not might. Will.
And who benefits? Follow the money. Chemical manufacturers save millions by avoiding compliance costs. Sterilization facilities avoid expensive upgrades. The industry protects profit margins while 90,000 Americans continue breathing carcinogens.
Who loses? Communities of color living near these facilities. Low-income neighborhoods where property values make industrial zoning politically easy. People who lack the resources to move, to sue, to fight back. The pattern is always the same: privatize the profits, socialize the cancer rates.
Now let's travel to Mariupol, Ukraine, where environmental destruction and human displacement intersect in ways that should horrify anyone paying attention. Bellingcat's investigation, published November 14 of last year, documents something chilling: Russia is systematically erasing a Ukrainian city and rebuilding it for Russian colonization.
During the 86-day siege of Mariupol, approximately 25,000 people died. 90% of residential buildings sustained damage or were completely destroyed. Bodies were buried in courtyards. Some remain under rubble to this day.
Victoria Mariva's story captures this tragedy. She fled to Mariupol in 2014 after Russia occupied Donbass, rebuilt her life, became a professor in the ecology department at Mariupol State University. Then her building was bombed. She eventually escaped to Ireland. When asked about her home, she said, "I have nothing left in Mariupol." She keeps keys to a door that no longer exists.
Bellingcat identified 23 multi-story housing complexes, over 50 buildings containing approximately 6,000 apartments, under construction and being marketed exclusively to Russian citizens. These aren't repairs. These are new developments built on top of Ukrainian homes, Ukrainian lives, Ukrainian sovereignty.
Here's how the theft works. Original residents cannot reclaim their property without Russian citizenship and in-person documentation. Compensation is capped at roughly €12,000 for single households. But new apartments start at €45,000. So you lose your home, get a fraction of its value, and can't afford to buy back into your own city.
Satellite imagery shows the systematic transformation. Destroyed buildings demolished. Streets renamed. Property declared ownerless and seized by the Russian state. It's nationalization through bombardment. They're not just occupying Mariupol, they're replacing its population.
One resident described it perfectly: they are building houses on bones. They are building so that people cannot return. This is ethnic cleansing with preferential mortgage rates. Russians moving into these apartments get 2% financing, compared to 20% typical rates in Russia proper.
And the environmental cost? Mass graves. Contaminated soil. Destroyed water infrastructure. Ecosystems obliterated by siege warfare. But none of that appears in Russian development brochures advertising seaside living in newly Russian Mariupol.
Human rights experts classify this as violation of international law protecting occupied territories. But international law requires enforcement, and enforcement requires power, and power is exactly what Russia is demonstrating by rebuilding a Ukrainian city for Russian citizens while Ukrainian refugees hold keys to doors that don't exist.
Now, in stark contrast, let's talk about Omar Yaghi, who just won the 2025 Nobel Prize in Chemistry for work that actually addresses climate crisis instead of profiting from it.
Yaghi was born to a Palestinian refugee family in Amman, Jordan. He grew up with severe resource scarcity, fresh water delivered only once a week. That experience of deprivation didn't break him. It shaped his scientific imagination.
He developed metal-organic frameworks, or MOFs, materials that can capture carbon and store hydrogen. These aren't abstract laboratory curiosities. Yaghi invented systems that pull water from desert air. He's literally extracting resources from environments where conventional extraction is impossible.
Think about the contrast. While chemical companies argue they shouldn't have to respond to science showing they're poisoning people, a refugee scientist creates technology to capture carbon and generate water in deserts. One system extracts profit from pollution. The other extracts solutions from scarcity.
According to Al Jazeera's reporting, Yaghi's humble beginnings fueled breakthrough science against the climate crisis. This isn't coincidental. When you've experienced what happens when resources run out, when water becomes precious, when scarcity is daily reality, you innovate differently.
His work has direct applications for climate adaptation in arid regions. Carbon capture technology using MOFs could help industries reduce emissions. Hydrogen storage addresses renewable energy infrastructure challenges. Water extraction from air could support communities facing drought and desertification.
But here's the question we need to ask: will Yaghi's innovations be accessible to the communities that need them most? Or will they be patented, monetized, and deployed primarily where profit margins are highest? Because technology doesn't liberate people. Access to technology liberates people.
The Nobel Prize celebrates individual genius, and Yaghi's work deserves recognition. But let's not pretend that prizes solve systemic problems. The climate crisis isn't a knowledge deficit. It's a power imbalance. We have the science. We've had the science for decades. What we lack is political will to challenge fossil fuel profits.
Which brings us to Brazil and the death of Nathália Urban, because challenging power comes with consequences that aren't abstract.
Urban died in September 2024 at 37 years old. She was a journalist and contributing editor for Brazil Wire, described by colleagues as a revolutionary who feared no one when searching for truth and defending minorities from abuses.
The memorial statement published by Brazil Wire notes that she reported fearlessly through Brazil's darkest period in modern history. While the article doesn't specify exact investigations, that period refers to the Bolsonaro administration, a government that oversaw Amazon deforestation reaching 15-year highs, attacks on indigenous land defenders, and systematic dismantling of environmental protections.
Urban's family and colleagues called for a full and proper police investigation into the events and circumstances that led to her death. That phrasing is significant. It implies questions remain unanswered. It implies the circumstances require investigation rather than being self-evident.
Brazil has one of the highest journalist murder rates globally, particularly for reporters covering environmental destruction, land rights, and corruption. According to the Committee to Protect Journalists, impunity for these killings exceeds 90%.
We don't have details about what specifically Urban was investigating when she died. But we know she worked during an administration that treated environmental journalists as enemies. We know Bolsonaro publicly attacked press freedom. We know that covering Amazon destruction, illegal mining, and land theft makes you a target.
Her colleagues wrote that millions watched and felt empowered by her, and that her revolutionary spirit leaves with us her biggest legacy. That's the language of someone who made powerful people uncomfortable. That's the language of someone who refused to look away.
And this connects directly to climate journalism, because reporting on environmental destruction means documenting who profits from that destruction. It means naming corporations, politicians, criminal networks. It means making enemies of people with resources to silence you.
Environmental defenders are being murdered at record rates globally. Land defenders in Brazil, the Philippines, Colombia, Honduras face assassination for protecting forests and rivers. Journalists documenting these murders often become targets themselves.
So when we talk about climate crisis, we can't separate it from the violence required to maintain the systems causing that crisis. Nathália Urban's death, whether directly connected to her journalism or not, exists in this context of silencing those who speak truth about environmental destruction.
Finally, let's talk about stretchable OLEDs, because even technological innovation reveals patterns of access and application.
Researchers at Drexel University have developed breakthrough technology using MZ materials to create organic light-emitting diodes that can bend, twist, and stretch while maintaining stability. According to IEEE Spectrum's reporting, this solves a critical challenge. Traditional displays use indium tin oxide, which becomes brittle and fails under physical deformation.
The innovation replaces rigid electrode materials with MZ compounds, layered transition metal carbides that offer both conductivity and flexibility. This enables genuinely deformable display architectures instead of merely flexible screens that can't handle repeated stress.
The immediate application is wearable displays, screens woven into clothing, integrated into medical devices, embedded in products that move with human bodies. But let's think about environmental monitoring applications.
Stretchable electronics could support real-time environmental data visualization on wearable platforms. Imagine field researchers with flexible screens displaying pollution levels, biodiversity data, climate measurements integrated directly into protective equipment. Imagine distributed sensor networks in challenging environments where rigid electronics fail.
But here's the critical question: who will have access to this technology? Wearable displays are being developed for consumer markets, for medical applications in wealthy healthcare systems, for military and industrial uses where budgets are massive.
Environmental monitoring in the Global South, where climate impacts are most severe, operates on shoestring budgets. Indigenous communities defending forests don't have venture capital funding. Grassroots organizations documenting pollution in Cancer Alley aren't backed by corporate R&D departments.
So we're developing incredible technology that could revolutionize environmental monitoring, but the economic structures determining deployment prioritize profit over need. The communities most impacted by climate crisis are least likely to access tools that could document and resist that crisis.
This is the pattern in every story tonight. Science that could protect people gets suppressed when it threatens profits. Cities get erased and rebuilt for colonizers. Refugee scientists develop breakthroughs while refugee communities lack access to basic resources. Journalists die for reporting truth. Technology advances, but access remains stratified by wealth and power.
Let's connect these dots explicitly. Trump's EPA limiting its use of new science isn't an isolated policy decision. It's part of a global pattern where regulatory capture allows corporations to poison communities with impunity. Those communities are disproportionately poor, disproportionately people of color, disproportionately lacking political power to fight back.
Mariupol's destruction and reconstruction isn't just war crimes, it's climate-adjacent violence. Siege warfare destroys ecosystems. Displaced populations become climate refugees. Reconstruction prioritizes colonization over environmental restoration. The environmental cost gets buried with the bodies.
Omar Yaghi's Nobel Prize celebrates individual achievement, but the broader story is about how scarcity drives innovation while abundance drives extraction. Refugee scientists create carbon capture technology. Meanwhile, wealthy nations refuse to fund climate adaptation in the Global South at scales matching the damage they've caused.
Nathália Urban's death reminds us that climate journalism is dangerous because it exposes power. Reporting on deforestation means documenting illegal logging operations. Investigating pollution means naming chemical companies. Environmental truth-telling threatens billion-dollar industries.
And stretchable OLED technology shows us that innovation without equitable access reproduces inequality. We develop tools that could democratize environmental monitoring, then deploy them where profit margins are highest rather than where need is greatest.
The common thread is power protecting itself. Whether through regulatory capture, military occupation, economic inequality, or violence against journalists, the pattern is consistent: systems that profit from environmental destruction actively resist accountability, adaptation, and truth.
So what do? First, we name the pattern. We refuse to treat these as separate stories. We connect EPA corruption to war crimes to journalist murders to technology access, because they're all manifestations of the same structural violence.
Second, we support environmental journalists and land defenders. Nathália Urban's colleagues deserve resources for investigation. Families of murdered environmental defenders deserve justice. Independent media documenting these connections needs financial support and protection.
Third, we demand regulatory enforcement with teeth. The EPA should be strengthening air pollution rules based on new science, not capitulating to industry lawyers. Chemical companies poisoning Cancer Alley should face criminal prosecution, not exemptions.
Fourth, we fight for technology access as a justice issue. If stretchable electronics can revolutionize environmental monitoring, that technology should be open source, freely available to communities on the front lines of climate crisis. Innovation funded by public research dollars should serve public good, not private profit.
And finally, we recognize that climate crisis and human rights are inseparable. You cannot address environmental destruction without confronting the violence required to maintain extractive systems. Mariupol's ruins, Urban's death, Cancer Alley's poisoning, these aren't side effects. They're the system working as designed.
We started tonight by saying we'd connect dots. Power doesn't want connected. If you're feeling uncomfortable right now, if this feels overwhelming, that's appropriate. The scale of what we're facing demands proportional response.
But don't let that overwhelm become paralysis. Every journalist who keeps reporting, every scientist who keeps researching, every community that keeps resisting, they're proving that power isn't absolute. Nathália Urban's colleagues are still publishing. Mariupol's refugees are preserving their city's memory. Communities in Cancer Alley are still fighting for clean air.
The pattern persists, but so does resistance. And that's where hope lives, not in denial, not in techno-optimism, but in solidarity with those refusing to accept that poison, displacement, and silence are inevitable.
I'm Alex Truth.
I'm Maya Clarity.
This has been Truth Report. Keep asking questions. Keep demanding answers.
And keep connecting the dots they don't want you to see. Good night.